Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alistair.
And I'm Nick.
And today we will be reviewing Star Trek Discovery, the latest version of Gene Roddenberry's classic sci-fi TV show, and then asking, is there any show that shouldn't go full dark? But before all of that, Nick, what have you been up to recently?
Well, my main, cultural project in the last month or so has been, to fully immerse myself in the Baltimore drug scene. I've been watching The Wire, and, yes, here's your cultural hot take from about a decade ago. The Wire, everybody, is good. And I also, because I decided I wasn't getting enough from that, I decided to read The Corner, which is a book by David Simon and Ed Burns, who are two of the main producery, showrunnery people on the Wire, I think, in which they basically hung around on a Baltimore street corner, like a very specific one, for a year. The subtitle of the book is A Year in the Life of an Inner City Neighbourhood, I think. I'm paraphrasing there, but that's roughly it. And, yeah, in fact, that's exactly it. Well done, me. And spoke to the locals and got a flavour for it and crafted a sort of non-fiction narrative story around what happened to them in that time. And this being real life and this being drug addiction, some people had, an arc in which they took a few steps towards recovery, and quite a lot of people had an arc in which they kept going, kept dealing, kept using, or made a brave attempt to get out and then fell back in again, or just straight up died. Yeah, I've seen a lot of editorials about The Wire say things like, "Oh, it's so real, man, it really brings it home to you." It's like, well, yeah, I mean, this is going to sound really, really hipstery in some ways. No, I don't know, hipstery, snobby, whatever, but yeah, having read The Corner, the real life version's actually more depressing. The Wire starts to look like the sort of romanticised entertainment version once you've really immersed yourself in that book at the same time. I mean, it's amazingly well written. It would kind of have to be to keep you entertained with, maybe entertained is the wrong word, but keep you captivated by these, relatively small cast set around one corner for, 600 pages. It's a bit of a brick, and it's not a short book. And, as I say, it's quite depressing. Yeah, it's still quite a page-turner. So, yeah, if you're interested in the drug scene, or if you watch The Wire and want more, then yeah, The Corner. It's a good place to go.
That's good to know. I didn't realise that the TV show was based on a book. I always assumed that the TV show is based on the book, or is it just they've researched this one topic of the drugs in Baltimore, and they're kind of both projects came out of the same thing?
Well, there is actually a separate TV show of The Corner.
Oh, right.
It was actually adapted, which, because I know these are real people, does in some ways make me feel weird. But, yeah, HBO did make a The Corner miniseries, which I think came before The Wire. So, yeah, I think it does prefigure The Wire in some ways. There's obviously a lot of the way that they deal with drug addiction and stuff, and a lot of the characters and plot points. You can sort of see bits and bobs that they've reused or expanded on, or just a general sense of how they're dealing with drug addiction, I think, obviously must be inspired by this year they spent on a corner talking to drug addicts. But it's not a direct adaptation. I mean, there's another book, which I haven't read. I have actually ordered a copy, but I haven't got it or read it yet, which is called Homicide, A Year on the Killing Streets, which is a similar narrative journalism book, in which the same guy spent a year hanging around the Baltimore Police Homicide Department. So, if anything, The Wire is kind of those two books smashed together.
Right.
Smashed together, and as I say, sort of heavily fictionalised to make it, add in a bit more of a clear cops and investigation narrative to make it a bit more saleable, I guess, if you want to go full cynical. But yeah, it's all good, interesting stuff.
Cool.
So yeah, that's what I've been doing. And I've also been watching The Wire. Maybe I'll get back to you on The Wire once I've finished it. I am excited because I've got to the end of season 3, which was as far as I got before my last rewatch trailed off. So now I'm finally starting episodes I haven't seen.
Does it consistently maintain the quality?
Well, I've seen 3 episodes of Series 4, and so far so good. I did do a quick internet check, and everyone on the internet seems to think Season 4 might be one of the best seasons, so
right.
No pressure, guys. Unfortunately, people also seem to agree that Season 5 is a bit of a disappointing ending, which is a bit of a bummer, but, never mind, we'll see.
Right.
But yeah, anyway, that's me. Drugs. How about you, Alistair?
Well, I've been at the London Film Festival. So yeah, every year the BFI hosts a big sprawling film festival. I think they've got somewhere around 200 films showing at various cinemas across London. And each year I try to get around a very small selection of the huge amount of stuff that's available. So yeah, it's really wide range of different things. There's high profile films with Hollywood stars. There's small independent British films. There's foreign language films from huge numbers of different countries all over the world. There's documentaries, experimental films. There was a lot of good stuff this year. Some highlights that I pulled out was there was a German film called Tiger Girl, which did the unusual thing of it could move quite quickly from being very, very funny, quite silly and slapstick, to being very serious and quite dark. So I don't know if it was like a dark comedy, you might say, but it could really flip the tone quite dramatically in a way that I think really worked. So I'd be interested to know if anyone else has seen that film, if they think the tone worked. I also saw a good British independent film called Funny Cow about a female stand-up comedian in the sort of 1970s, which if you like your British social realism with a bit of comedy, that was very good. It stars Maxine Peake. I think that comes out in January. I saw a good documentary about politics in Northern Ireland right now called A Mother Brings Her Son to Be Shot. That's very good. I saw another good documentary called The Final Year about Barack Obama's last year in office. And yeah, that was really, really good. And they had a very high level of access, able to really get behind the scenes and interview a lot of the really quite senior people and who were quite candid about what was going on.
Did they deal much with who was replacing him, or?
Yeah, well, that's the interesting thing, because the film, I guess they were editing it this year, shooting it last year. I guess they made the decision to keep in several bits when the people they interview were saying, oh, Trump will never be the nominee, and then like, oh, Trump will never win. And like them being quite confident that he was going to lose, and then kept in, obviously, everyone's emotional reactions when he did win. I guess that was reflecting how people felt at the time.
Yeah.
I don't know, it must have been a difficult decision. So shall we keep in these bits where these people blatantly make the wrong prediction?
Well, I think, as you say, it's got to be, they've got to reflect what actually happened to some extent. And one of the big things with Trump was that no one seemed to think he was going to win until suddenly, seemingly too late to do anything about it, everyone realised he actually might.
So yeah, and the film does capture that. I also saw a good comedy film starring Matt Damon called Downsizing.
Yes, I saw that as well. That was seemingly our annual one team-up film at London Film Festival.
Yeah, it was quite silly. It had a quite silly premise, and then kind of the humour seemed to come from that, which is in the near future America, there's a fashion for shrinking yourself to about, 1/8 your size or something like that, or maybe smaller. And just because your money goes much further when you're tiny. Yeah, and it's quite silly, and then uses that silly premise to make good jokes, so I enjoyed it.
It's quite fun. It meanders a bit. One sometimes wonders if you could describe it as having a plot. It is a lot of fun.
It's there are bits when I was like, I'm not unentertained by this, but I am slightly confused about where it's going. But the beginning bit was quite good when Matt Damon was making the decision to shrink himself and then going through the process.
Oh yeah, most of the individual scenes are pretty fun. Especially, actually the process where he actually shrinks himself was probably the best bit. But
yeah.
Anyway, I'm not reviewing this, but yes, it's, for what it's worth, it's quite fun.
But yeah, so overall it was a good year at the London Film Festival. There were other things I saw, but that's kind of a brief summary of some of the highlights I'd recommend people checking out.
Cool. Might see some of those at some point. The final year does sound interesting. It's the sort of thing I might put on Netflix if it ever appears, though.
Yeah, it's worth seeing. Yes, just to get the kind of inside perspective of what was going on. Yeah, I guess kind of like the West Wing, I suppose.
I was going to say, I'm a West Wing fan. I could enjoy the last few minutes of optimistic politics in America.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Okay, and our main thing to review this fortnight is Star Trek Discovery, the latest TV series from the Star Trek franchise. In fact, the first live-action show from the Star Trek franchise for quite a while, I think. So this one is slightly more heavily serialised than before, slightly more premium telly, dark, morally ambiguous. This one focuses on Michael Burnham, played by Sonika Martin Green, who it turns out really was wasted on The Walking Dead, who starts off on a different ship entirely, only to mutiny it, cause a war, and funnily enough get heavily disciplined for this, only to be sort of forcibly dragooned into joining a different ship called the Discovery, because the captain, Gabriel Lorca, played by Jason Isaacs, thinks he can use her talent to help with his possibly slightly shady military science missions. So yeah, we'll be talking a bit about this. For the record, since spoilers are a thing, because we record at the weekend, we have seen the first 5 episodes. Spoilers, at least on some implied level, might happen for those first 5. We have not seen the 6th, whereas it's very possible you have. Congratulations. There'll be no spoilers for that unless we get in some very lucky guesses. So with that in mind, I am not a huge Star Trek person. I don't feel I've seen this many episodes of any Star Trek show before. Alistair, are you a Trek person, and did you like this one?
I'd say I'm certainly a fan. I've seen the films, and I've seen most of the previous Star Trek series. I don't think I've ever actually sat down and watched them all from beginning to end to see if there's any I haven't seen. But I certainly watched a lot of Star Trek when I was a teenager.
Okay.
Of all the, of Next Generation, The Voyager, and Deep Space Nine, as were the main ones that were around at the time. I haven't seen much of Enterprise, but people said it wasn't very good. So I might pass over that. But in terms of Star Trek Discovery, yeah, my take is that I like what they've done with it. They've introduced some new innovations, making this show slightly different from your previous sort of Star Trek shows. And I think that's really helped to, make it a bit fresher and breathe some new life into the franchise. For example, this is the first Star Trek show which is really arc plot based, as opposed to kind of more sort of serialized, individually contained stories. It does focus heavily on the kind of the big kind of plot overriding the show, just like they do in, say, Breaking Bad or 24, which is one of the things that's changed a lot since the last time new Star Trek was on TV. I also like the fact that they're focusing on one of the crew people or senior officers, not making the captain the main character.
Well, yeah, I mean that's what's enabling them to do this sort of keeping it at the distance, morally ambiguous thing, I guess, which is maybe for some people one of the things that jars slightly compared to other Star Treks, but I like Jason Isaacs. Jason Isaacs does this sort of entertaining yet sinister thing quite well, so fair enough. I mean, as I say, Sonica Martin Green, who clearly didn't get anywhere near enough to do on The Walking Dead because she mostly just sort of ran away from stuff and occasionally looked sad. She's definitely able to hold the show. She can definitely do, the unspoken emotions of it all. They're not doing the first officer's log, are they? They sort of tease that they might, and then they seem to have stopped doing that. So she doesn't get to do a voiceover, sadly.
Yeah, that's another way that makes it different to previous Star Trek TV shows. I also like the fact that there's a sort of mystery, at least in the early episodes, about what's going on with Discovery. In the others, Star Treks, the vessels that they're on, it's relatively straightforward, sort of like they have a mission, they're trying to do the mission, whereas they do kind of keep you in the dark for a while about what is going on Discovery. It's got a secret experimental mission. And I quite like that, the fact that there's a sense of mystery about the ship itself, which is definitely new. And also the fact that there's a sense that not all is well aboard the ship. Usually in the Star Trek shows, the ship is a place of safety, whereas in this, there's a lot of tension aboard the ship because, as you said at the top, the Michael character has mutinied and started a war, so she's not popular.
Yeah, which again might not be what some people are after with Star Trek. I know there's been a lot of talk about how it's meant to be, the optimistic vision where everyone's getting on, and this is, a show where a lot of the characters don't like or trust each other, which is certainly enough to get me, the fan of sort of morally ambiguous premium telly, and I'm a big fan of these sort of no one gets on and bad things keep happening shows. I think, fundamentally I quite enjoy this. It has a certain annoying flatness that slightly holds it back from greatness. Like, I know, it's getting slightly better as we go along, but 5 episodes in, I feel like I should have a slightly bigger handle on some of the characters than I do. And I often feel like the acting is compensating for some often quite sort of clunky dialogue. Everyone's still a bit sort of, as you know, Bob, we've been friends for 8 years, or whatever.
There's some quite exposition-heavy dialogue at times. The acting does make up for it. I think the actors are doing very well with these parts. And there's certainly, like you say, Jason Isaacs is very good in the morally ambiguous captain role, and Sonequa Martin Green is good as a sort of conflicted, tortured main character who's carrying around a lot of guilt for accidentally starting a war and getting her previous captain, played by Michelle Yeoh, killed. I thought she was very good as well, actually, as the first captain.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if that was meant to be a sort of vaguely meta bait and switch. Like, the Michelle Yeoh character was, in fact, the whole sort of version of the series we saw set up in the first 2 episodes, which are basically, again, we're going a bit spoiler here, but it is spoilers for like a month ago. The first 2 episodes were sort of prelude, and we didn't get to Discovery until episode 3, basically. Because at the end of episode 2, her initial ship with Michelle Yeoh as captain is destroyed, and Michelle Yeoh is killed. And the original ship with Michelle Yeoh was a lot more of a sort of conventional Star Trek ship, It was very bright, people seemed to like each other, the captain was a warm, wise, parental figure. If the broad journey here is meant to be we start on a sort of conventional Star Trek ship, it gets blown up, and then we go on to this sort of slightly mysterious, ambiguous vessel, then, it's an interesting message to put through.
Yeah, I think you're right that they did a bait and switch there by setting up what is a fairly standard Star Trek dynamic and then changing it up for this new one that they're going for on the Discovery, which feels quite different. I do think they have kept true to the sort of feel of Star Trek. It's not a kind of a they've not gone completely out on a limb. There's still the sense that they're exploring new frontiers and kind of pushing back the boundaries of, I guess, humanity's ignorance by going forth and discovering, as the clues in the name. there's lots of the classic iconography of Star Trek. The design of the ships is consistent, and the phasers and the teleporters. You're certainly on familiar territory with the way things look and feel. Although one thing I think, again, as is the vogue of premium TV, is that they kind of dig into these things in a bit more depth. They go under the surface of characters more, so maybe they did because the audience now wants more developed characters and more kind of character introspection, which is, again, a nice innovation.
It is, although I'm kind of glad they didn't keep up the thing from the first episode of interspersing it with flashbacks. I'm not sure the world needs that from Star Trek every week. I feel like keeping the drama in the here and now is good. I can see again in this sort of prelude bit getting a bit of that in to give some quick insights into Michael Burnham, but I'm also kind of glad they've dropped it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, that was good for the two-part pilot, but now they've moved on to the main plot. It would have slowed the show down too much if they had a lot of flashbacks.
Yeah, I also quite like, in some ways, that the main, especially in the 3 episodes we've actually been on Discovery, the main serialised thrust seems to have been, how does this machine work? I quite like the sort of slow unfolding of that as the main sort of ongoing storyline. I mean, I know it's not exactly hard sci-fi. In many ways, it's just the machine is a bit of a magic thing. The mysterious mushrooms that let you basically teleport.
Yeah, that is very new. I don't think there's been much discussion of that in Star Trek before, or anything that can do that, unless I've missed it. Yeah, I haven't actually spent time looking into how the Star Trek community has received some of these changes, especially the fact that now ships, or at least this one ship, can teleport to anywhere it likes in the galaxy, rather than doing the tedious warping from place to place. I mean, I certainly think that it's breathed new life into the franchise, making this show a bit different to what's come before. And I think you did need to update the show a bit, and again, like bring in some new stuff that modern premium TV audiences want in order to bring back this franchise. It would have been kind of tonally very flat, I think, if they had just done a show that was much more similar to Next Generation or Voyager. I think it just would have seemed a bit, I don't know, old-fashioned maybe, or inconsistent. None of those shows aren't good. It's just they were of their time and Discovery is of this time.
Well, I think it's I don't know, I mean, I've possibly going off on one about the nature of premium telly here, and I think the issue is a lot of the audience Star Trek is aiming for is your sort of enthusiastic audience who consume things like box sets, and I think a lot of those audiences have gone on to very serialised shows at this point. Like, I might be wrong, but I sometimes get the feeling that a lot of the sort of the network shows that have this sort of the old model of 22 episodes, 40 minutes, aggressively standalone with very little serialisation, like the old Star Trek shows were. I think I do sometimes feel maybe like the premium telly we culture slightly looks down on those shows nowadays, or slightly views them as the inferior version of the art. I might be wrong, or I might just be projecting my own feelings on the world, who knows. But I think if it wants to be a show in current edge-of-your-seat geek culture or whatever, being some sort of serialised premium TV show was probably inevitable.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's very hard to think of a popular show of the moment that isn't using a kind of arc plot format. Yeah, and if you watch an episode of like House or CSI now, they seem quite old-fashioned with the sense of, really? They just did this every week with sort of subtle variations? How did we ever find this entertaining? I guess just things move on, and what we want now is more arc plot. We want a darker tone. We want more introspective characters, or characters that certainly have more meat to them so that you can dig into their past or their emotions more. And that's what Star Trek Discovery is doing. It's bringing the sort of format of what people want, but in Star Trek.
I do feel like the serialisation is sometimes not being used quite expertly. Like I did 5 episodes in, it does arguably feel like not that much has actually happened.
Yeah, it is moving quite slowly, the plot.
Which is, I mean, I know it doesn't help, but obviously the first 2 episodes were basically a prelude, so I guess you could argue that this is basically episode 3 of the show rather than episode 5, but still, you do get the feeling we are sort of moving through it in a very sort of modular, day-by-day type way, and part of me does want them to put in some time jumps and separate out the episodes a bit. I wouldn't, much as I may have just been mildly, implicitly snotty about old-school network TV shows with their individual plots, it wouldn't necessarily kill them to include a bit of individual plot here and there.
Yeah, I mean, you might get more of that now they've established the dynamic over the first sort of 5 episodes. I think the 5th episode did have a bit of a standalone plot line in that the captain gets captured and they have to get him back. But obviously it was also related to the overall plot line in that they have to use their strange mushroom drive to rescue the captain. So it kind of advances that arc plot at the same time as it tells us kind of slightly more self-contained story for that one episode. And also it advances the plot of the Michael character trying to gel more with her crewmates and work with them in the fact that they have to work together to rescue the captain. So yeah, they're kind of advancing the arc plots by telling a slightly more self-contained story in that episode.
Yeah, I must admit they did slightly adjust that in episode 5. Episode 5 actually did quite a lot for me, and it both had a slightly more contained story, and it actually gave the characters outside of Jason Isaacs and Michael Burnham, a bit more to do. Like I actually feel like I have some sense of characters outside those two and the character Saru, the inevitable one alien heavily made up character on the crew.
Yeah.
And he's quite good, don't get me wrong. I don't know if this is a kick in the face to the established Star Trek fan, but the subtitled Klingon scenes aren't doing much for me. Yeah, I've nothing against characterising the baddies. Obviously that's another premium jelly thing, The baddies must also have some motivation and some sort of valid point. But just the way they're done with the subtitles and the long speeches, they sort of drop the already quite slow pace to a crawl. And I'm not convinced they're giving me that much insight into them that could just be summarised in one line later on.
Yeah, that's another innovation in this new series, in that they've got a ongoing Klingon arc. So they're actually, leaving the Discovery and going elsewhere. Yeah, it's a strange plot arc. It's moving quite slowly. And they've got this kind of Klingon religious fanatic, and he's trying to unite the Klingons together to wipe out humans or the Federation. But yeah, it's moving quite slowly. I'm interested to see where it's going, but it hasn't really delivered much in the way of interesting drama so far. It should be said, actually, for those who know about Star Trek but necessarily haven't seen this show, is that it's a prequel to the other shows apart from Enterprise. It's set, I guess, between Enterprise and the original show, and it's set during the Federation Klingon War. The first episode begins with the beginning of that war.
I don't know, I mean, it seems pretty inevitable that the dead leader from the prequel, his sort of main sidekick, is going to emerge as his, successor, and become a new angry Klingon fanatic leader, and then everyone's going to fight each other, probably. But yeah, I don't know, I'm not massively enthralled by those scenes.
Yeah.
Sorry. But I guess if this is a prequel to everything except Enterprise, then the mushroom drive's probably just going to disappear, isn't it? It's probably going to turn out to be somehow bad and then get destroyed.
Most likely that's where it's going. Or it'll be considered so powerful that they have to destroy it or something like that, because, I don't know, maybe there's a bit when they have to sacrifice Discovery so it doesn't fall into the Klingon hands. Although it is also nice to see the origin of the Klingon cloaking technology, which is another plot line they're developing in the Klingon bit of the story. But again, it's not really delivering much in the way of dramatic goods, although it is interesting for the fans.
I thought there might be some Easter egg value there, not that I know enough to spot it. I did recognise the name of some old captains on a screen last episode.
Yeah, Captain Archer from Enterprise.
Although I didn't realise that the character who was in prison with them, Harry Mudd, is apparently an old Star Trek character. I read this in a review. I have no idea who he is. I've not seen those episodes.
Yeah, I missed that, actually. That was well spotted.
I think it might be an original series.
Yeah. I also liked that they name-dropped James Cromwell's character from Star Trek First Contact at one point. Zephyrin Cochrane, the inventor of the Faster Than Light drive. Yeah, he got name-dropped in a list of great scientists, including Einstein and Elon Musk, which is a nice way of squaring the circle between the past, our current history, and Star Trek's own in-universe history, which is our future.
I mean, I don't know if I'd have picked Elon Musk personally, but I see your point.
I guess to make it sound contemporary.
Yeah. But yeah, as I say, I think there's a slight flatness to it that holds it short from greatness, as I said a while ago, but I am quite enjoying this.
Yeah, it's good. I'm interested to see where it goes, and I'm enjoying it so far, and I do like the fact they have changed it up a bit. That is refreshing.
I think it had to be some kind of modern. It had to be, a vaguely post-Battlestar Galactica Star Trek. They couldn't just make a colour version of the old ones. It would have looked like some kind of weird nostalgia act.
Yeah. Although it was odd when someone said fuck in Star Trek. I was taken aback by that. I was like, you can't say you can't say fuck in Star Trek.
I imagine we'll be getting onto that very shortly when we cut to the question, but yes, can you say fuck in Star Trek? Well, let's find out, as our question, of course, this fortnight is, are there any franchises that shouldn't go full adult, or full dark, or whatever? Basically, what franchises shouldn't have adult content rammed into them? Of course, we covered something fairly similar to this way back in Modern Fantasy Violence number 2, where we talked about the arrival of adult-rated superhero films. But there has been a lot of talk around Star Trek Discovery and its introduction of both some swearing, as Alistair said, the word fuck has now appeared in Star Trek twice in quick succession, and as well as some surprisingly grim violence in places. Those people being turned inside out in, I think it was episode 3. That did not feel like something that was of a piece with the Star Trek franchise, I'll be honest. Of course, we are looking at a Star Trek show that is so hardcore grown up that its acronym is STD, so I don't know why I was surprised. But the arrival of, violence and swearing in Star Trek is interesting because it's you can see how it's ended up happening. You know, they're clearly trying to be more of an adult premium telly show. It's set on a spaceship where one of the main premises of the whole thing is it's a bad place where bad things sometimes happen. And, you know, historically, we've all heard of red shirts, or at least those of us who are nerds have, disposable characters who are basically there just to die, and historically wear red shirts. That's a thing from Star Trek, and it makes it pretty clear that death has always been a part of Star Trek, so why not include a bit of swearing and violence?
My take on that is going adult is a way you can kind of breathe new life into a franchise, or, you know, update it for the present day. I mean, we've seen a trend of this recently, quite a lot in films. I mean, we've seen a darker, grittier, more adult Batman, same with like James Bond. And as well as being like darker, grittier, maybe more violent, also kind of exploring more adult themes like the psychology of the character or their past. It's a way to, like I say, update the show, bring it into a line with what we expect from our drama today. It's also, I think we take things more seriously when there's a darker tone. And some of these franchises desperately needed rescuing from the grasp of silliness. Like, you know, Die Another Day was terrible and silly for James Bond. Batman and Robin, terrible and silly. So kind of updating the tone and making people take them a bit more seriously was not a bad thing.
Yeah, but I don't know if Batman and Robin was bad because it was slightly sillier. It was bad because it was kind of bad. I think if you make that kind of Batman story and, you know, lead into it and do it right, I mean, you know, the 60s Batman show, although it's not seen as a grand philosophical thesis on anything, I think, it does do that in a fun, good way.
Yeah.
You know, it's possible to make the silliness work. I mean, this is, you know, a debate as old as time, or at least certainly as old as the last 10 years. But yeah, the idea that more dark is more good isn't necessarily, I think, the right way to go down.
Yeah.
And I think the reason it sometimes clunks slightly in Discovery is that a lot of the way they're presenting it is still quite sort of clean. I don't want to say generic, because that sounds like a criticism, but slightly clean, friendly network television. And therefore, when it does ram some swearing or some extreme violence into it, it still seems weirdly jarring compared to the rest of the presentation. Like, the way the fucking call in the last episode did seem really sort of, what? You know, I always recoiled from my screen with the sheer energy of confusion.
It did feel very much like it just been inserted in for the sake of it being there. I don't know, I guess they're trying to prove they've got grown-up credentials by having like the occasional splash of ultra-violence or swearing. Yeah, I don't know if it really adds much.
But just having it appear like that just makes it seem a bit... Well, it just makes it seem gratuitous. It makes it seem like it's just there for the sake of it. I mean, they also seem to really overstate the word fucking in a way that felt kind of unnatural. As if they really did have a director off screen shouting, "Alright guys, this might be the first fuck in Star Trek history, so enunciate." Because I think I'm told they'd said shit in previous scenes, and I didn't really notice, because I'm desensitised, clearly. But that particular fuck really stood out to me.
Well, they did emphasise it, as you say.
As they say in porn, yeah. I mean, it's an interesting point of comparison to Battlestar Galactica, which, I mean, that had made up swear words, obviously. Thrack or whatever.
Yeah, that's to get it past the network TV censors.
Yes, but if that had been on a premium channel and they'd been able to just say fuck, and they had, I don't think it would have seemed out of place, because that was the kind of... They'd successfully got that sort of scuzzy sheen of adultness, which would have made swearing fit in.
Yeah.
I don't think it would have stood out as much there as it does in Star Trek, which still feels a bit like a sort of fun network show, even with the sort of slightly darker underpinnings they've added to it. And therefore, when someone turns up and fucks, it seems weird.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this show owes a lot to Battlestar Galactica for setting that kind of dark tone of space adventures. Previous to that, even like Voyager or Deep Space Nine, where they've been a bit more threatening, it was still fairly optimistic in tone. Whereas, you know, the whole kind of premise of Battlestar Galactica is, you know, kind of everything's terrible and everything's getting worse. So, and yeah, the kind of the swearing and the grimness sort of really did match the tone. I guess one of the issues about Star Trek Discovery is that it's trying to be a premium TV show in the mold of Battlestar Galactica and a Star Trek show at the same time, which can lead to some tonal inconsistencies.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of it is, as I'll say, there is a slight flatness that's holding it from sailing in the way it wants to. Like, I don't feel like the characters in Star Trek Discovery are quite sort of just kind of three-dimensional characters who can really carry that sort of thing, whereas the characters in Battlestar Galactica did feel that way. I mean, I don't know, maybe it's just because I've seen about 2 seasons of Battlestar, about 40 episodes, whereas I've seen 5 episodes of Star Trek, so maybe it's unfair for me to compare the depth of characters at this stage.
Yeah, And I think part of making your show more adult is having more detailed characters. You can make a show adult by having swearing, sex, and violence, but you can also make it more adult by having more complex themes and more complex emotions and more complex characters. Whereas previous Star Trek shows, the characters may be a bit more iconographic. You've got, like you say, a patriarchal, warm, likeable captain, and then a plucky first mate and all the rest of it. Whereas in this, the characters have got more to them, which is, I think, a way of making the show, as well as, like I say, bring it in line with what people expect today, but also giving the show a bit more meat, for an adult audience, of people who want the characters to seem like regular adults with kind of complex emotions. Although, like I say, not every character's been that richly developed so far, but give it time. There's only been 5 episodes that we've seen.
I mean, I've been interested by, in terms of, making things adult, the whole Defenders smorgasbord on Netflix. They're clearly here's a bunch of superheroes mashed through the premium telly machine. I mean, they've tried to they very much used the sort of 13 episodes telling one story model, and they've tried to pick the characters who in the comics have had a sort of, I don't know, darker edge to them, I guess, who aren't that flamboyant and silly. But I don't know, it always feels like in practice a lot of them end up falling down the trap of either the characters feeling quite flat and silly or them shoving in weird superhero stuff because I guess they feel somehow obliged to, and it never feeling quite right compared to the general tone that they seem to be going to. I mean, like the hand in Daredevil and Defenders, quite aside from the fact that they're boring, they're also totally very weird. And Diamondback in the second half of Luke Cage, to be honest, he felt like he teleported in from a different superhero show entirely, and he really did drag down the whole back half of the series for me. He was just a bit of a silly villain, even before he turned up in the final episode in his stupid fucking snake costume.
Yeah.
I don't know, I feel like if you're going to wear your darkness as a badge of honour, it has to not feel like you've just taken it and nailed it on in some way. They have to actually take the show and turn it into that. I mean, Jessica Jones did, for the most part, do a good job of... I don't want to get into reviewing other shit in detail, but I mean, Jessica Jones did the best job of processing the comic into that sort of different thing. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, in many ways, the question is bullshit, because... Sorry, question. A lot of it is just, it works if you play it right and do it right.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I kind of felt was the kind of my main takeaway from thinking about this, was that going dark or going adult for the sake of going adult doesn't work. You need to make sure you are actually adding something to your show. What are you trying to achieve by doing this? Sometimes where this doesn't work is because they are just doing it for the sake of it. I think, for example, like Man of Steel, when they tried to have some kind of more grown-up emotions and a sort of supposedly, a more introspective, complex character for Superman, but he just ended up just being mopey, which wasn't particularly good. Or again, Batman v Superman, when they try to have, again, maybe a darker tone and going into the sort of psychology of Batman and Superman a bit, and it ended up just being, I don't know, it was just...
tedious.
Yeah, tedious, yeah, because they're not really adding anything by doing this. I mean, at least with the Batman, like Batman Begins and the other Christopher Nolan films, or the Daniel Craig Bond films, they were using it to revitalise the franchise, change the tone away from previous mistakes, and also dig into, using these kind of adult themes to explore the characters more. They were at least trying to achieve something rather than just going adult for the sake of it.
Yeah, I mean, I know everyone chooses the Dark Knight movies as the big obvious example of a time where it works.
Yeah.
But even they never quite made the actual Batman costume work for me. I don't know whether it was something Nolan wanted to jettison or not, or whether he agreed that it had to be in there. But it really felt like it was just there because it had to be in there. And everything else had been toned down to this sort of aggressively grey, realistic level. And then every so often, it's a bloke dressed as a bat. And everyone else is just in a suit or a military uniform, or occasionally wearing some white makeup, and that bloke's dressed as a bat.
Yeah. I guess, yeah. But it depends on how much you're willing to buy into the premise of Batman, which is that by becoming a symbol and dressing up in this way means he's like more effective in fighting crime than he would be if he was just like a guy in a ski mask hitting people.
Oh yeah, obviously I'm willing to buy into Batman. It just felt like that reasonably traditional version of Batman felt a bit weird compared to the rest of the film he was in. But I guess ultimately, when you do a Batman film, you've got to have Batman in it at some point.
It didn't work for Man of Steel because I wasn't willing to buy into the premise in the same way, which is the idea that Superman is this great symbol of hope and what humanity can aspire to, which I get it. I understand what they were aiming for, but to try and dig into, like, what is it, the symbol of, hope mean did seem to result in basically a Superman that was quite mopey and quite angsty, which wasn't particularly entertaining.
They kept saying he was a great symbol of hope, but he never, I don't know. I mean, I guess he saved some people from various disasters, so maybe that's good enough. But I just felt like they kept saying he was, and you just assume he is because it's Superman, but he never actually seems that inspiring on the screen.
And again, I just think they're not really thinking through what exactly they're doing. It's more of just a kind of, okay, post-Batman, everything's got to be serious now and darker in tone, so can we do that with Superman? As we're like, well, you can, but you need to probably think about it more than just that.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know, it can work. It worked fine in Logan. They successfully took the whole thing and, they beat the whole thing down to being roughly that level. They didn't have any X-Men turn up in leather. Everything was at a fairly consistent degree of adultiness for the most part.
Yeah. And it did have more complex emotions for the Logan character, and it also had more violence in previous films, as they were able to actually show Wolverine impaling people.
At long last. So yeah, again, it's the sort of thing that can work. It's just also a sort of thing that's also sometimes used as an easy shortcut. Or in the case of Star Trek, I don't know, it's not really being used as an easy shortcut to anything. It seems like they almost felt like they should do it because they're now competing in this slightly different TV market, and I don't know if they really wove it into the whole show in the way that would have made it feel natural. Which why ultimately the Star Trek examples may be slightly more interesting than these superhero examples we've talked about before, because ultimately, yes, the superheroes were, as we've said before, just trying to go dark and ending up making something that's either boring or pretentious. But in Star Trek, it's just this sort of weird, well, we're a TV show now, that's what TV shows do, unless you want to be treated like you're for children.
Yeah, I think that's key to it, is that one of the reasons why people do this kind of adult or darker tone is that they really want to be taken seriously, or they think it's a shortcut to be taken seriously. But one thing to be aware of is that if it doesn't work, or you're not really adding anything by doing this tone, it can make you end up looking even more silly than you did to start with. Like, a good recent example is that Tom Cruise film that came out earlier this year, which I didn't see, but it was called The Mummy. Yeah, and obviously they were trying to go, this is a dark sort of semi-horror action movie. Lots of scary stuff. It's both dark in tone, but it just didn't really work, other than the fact it was trying to be dark, so it was taken seriously. So I looked at the trailer and thought, actually, that looks quite silly. I can see the tone you're going for of seriousness, but you seem to missed it and then kind of come out the other side back to silly again. At least that's the impression I got from the trailer.
The problem with that trailer was that it seemed to have completely failed to include anything that was genuinely, actually dark or unsettling. So it was just a lot of quite generic-looking, horror-y, actually mid-level fantasy stuff, and everyone talking about it in a really serious way. And it's just sort of, this just looks tiring.
But I think that's a trap to be aware of, falling into, that it's not always a shortcut to being more serious or being taken more seriously.
Yeah, it always comes back to that specific fuck on Star Trek for me. I really would love to have been in whatever meeting we decided, right, what we need is for these two characters to say, this is fucking cool. Yes, it is fucking cool. Here, when we've never said fuck before in the history of the franchise, it's just a bit, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe they got exactly what they wanted, which is a bunch of people like us talking at length about whether they should say fuck in Star Trek.
Yeah.
So, yeah, maybe we're falling into their trap as we speak. But, yeah, I'm just a bit curious what the intended message was. Whether it was just we're the sort of show who can say fuck, or whether they just wanted everyone to talk at length about whether Star Trek should be the sort of show in which they say fuck.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was sort of slightly odd and took me by surprise when it happened. At least I feel better at myself when I saw there was a plethora of geeky think pieces about, saying fucking Star Trek, whether it's okay or not. So at least I seem to have picked up on something other people have picked up on.
It was the only thing I saw people comment on during the day before, because the episode was up on Netflix at first thing in the morning on a Monday. I watched it that evening, and the only thing I saw people comment on during the day, like people who watched it before me because they don't have real jobs, was they said fucking Star Trek. So yeah, maybe that helped as well. But although when I sat down to watch the episode, the one thing I knew I was waiting for was the F-bomb.
Because if you're anticipating it, then it would have stuck out even more.
It's very possible. Anyway, yeah, I don't know if we've really established what franchises should or shouldn't go full adults, but definitely you should try and weave it in better if you do.
Yeah, well, there are some that clearly shouldn't. Like, no one wants dark and gritty Fireman Sam. They'll just be terrible. That's all we have time for. If you have enjoyed this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, then please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so that you never miss an episode. While you're there, consider leaving us a review, as it helps us spread the word about the show. You can also visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can find other episodes of this podcast, bonus audio under the name Excessive Fantasy Violence, and short written pieces by Nick and myself.
Yep, you can also follow us on social media, either by going to @MFV Podcast on Twitter, or searching us on Facebook. I think we are actually facebook.com/moderate fantasy violence, or if you search our name, our little purple logo should pop up, and then you can hear the latest exciting news about the show, like if we ever have a delay for some reason. Hasn't happened for a while. We pride ourselves on our timeliness. Okay, thank you for listening. I've been Nick Bryan. You can find more from me on Twitter as @NickMB, or you can go to nickbryan.com to see my blog. You can also now go to comics.nickbryan.com, where I am periodically posting some comics. In fact, there should, as of this publication, be 2 up. One drawn by Chris Caesar with some funny wizards, and one made entirely by me with some stock photos about geese. That one's gonna either be a massive success or be completely ignored, I'm sure. So yeah, if you want to see some comics, the comics are now happening. You could also back me on Patreon at patreon.com/nickbryan if you want to help me do more comics.
I've been Alistair Ball. You can follow me on Twitter at AlistairJRBall, and you can find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. That's all we have time for in this episode, but join us next time when we will be reviewing Thor Ragnarok. Thanks very much. Goodbye.
Bye.
More darkness!